Did a trip. We've done a few trips like this over the years. The first one was back in 1990 to Normandy in France. This year we went to a place called Arnhem. Arnhem is a very lovely town in Holland. And we went there for the 80th anniversary to commemorate quite a famous battle. Probably more famous to people of a certain age. I'm not going to say what that certain age is. It became immortalised in a film called The Bridge Too Far, and probably all the gentlemen in this room of my age and older would have seen or know that film. I can recommend it. So, just to give a bit of a context, Deb's going to give me a disapproving look if I'm talking too long. So I'll try and keep this. I could talk for hours. I'll try and keep it punchy. So just a bit of a context, because I think you always need to set the scene a bit with these things. September 1944. We're getting near the end of the war. I'll just talk about the war in Europe, not the rest of the world. That stage, there'd been the Allied landings in Normandy. After 2 months of very, very heavy fighting in Normandy, the Allied armies, that was predominantly the Brits, the Americans, the Canadians, but also French and other Allied nations, many of them, had managed to break out from Normandy. And they actually very quickly, the fear was that they were going to have to battle all the way through France, but they broke the German army in Normandy. And within 3 to 4 weeks, they went from being in Normandy to being into Brussels and beyond. They more or less liberated all of Belgium and got into Holland. And they'd rolled through most of France and were along the German border all the way down to the Swiss Alps. So really successful move, but it was moving too quickly and they couldn't actually keep the supplies up. So what happened was, the front line became stalemate. The German resistance stiffened along the German border. So a very famous general called Montgomery and others came up with an idea. If they punched a hole in the German front line, they parachuted a load of troops behind the lines, and this was all about getting over the River Rhine. The River Rhine was a natural barrier to get into Germany, and it has many tributaries off it, mainly going through Holland. So they said, well, if we capture the main bridges over all these bridges over all of the Rhine, happened to be the British because it happened in their part of the front line, send 60,000 Brits up one road, they can link up with all these airborne guys, get over the Rhine, the war will be over by Christmas. We've heard that a few times. So how the operation went was there was roughly 30,000 airborne troops, 20,000 Americans. They took 2 towns nearest along this road, and the Brits got Arnhem, which was the furthest. The operation didn't go well from the start. The airborne guys landed all 3 divisions. The British coming up this one road were getting attacked right from the get-go. They managed to link up with the Americans in both towns, but they were constantly being attacked along this road, and that drained their resources trying to stop them being cut off. The Brits made it to Arnhem, and I'll talk more about that now. So there were 12,000 British guys that got into airborne troops that were parachuted in Arnhem. The problem was the nearest drop zones were quite a long way from the town, and so they had a long route into town. They had problems with the jeeps. So of the 12,000 that were supposed to be at that bridge to defend it, so that day the Brits were on the north side, the German side, and the Allies would be coming up the road. Of the 12,000 that were supposed to be there, only 800 managed to get through to that bridge. And the reason was the Allied intelligence hadn't picked up the fact that there were 2 German SS Panzer divisions in the area. And for those that don't know, they are like the elite of the Germans. They hadn't really they knew they were there, but they underplayed it. And airborne soldiers are very good fighters, but they're lightly armed. They don't have the capability of taking on tanks. So only 800 guys managed to get to the bridge. After 4 days, they were run out of ammunition. They'd suffered a lot of casualties, and they had to surrender. The other 11,000 so airborne guys were trying to get to the bridge. But because there were so many Germans in the area, they just completely built a line to stop them getting to the 800 guys that were there. They tried for about 2 or 3 days to get to there, but they were now being attacked from all sides. So they roughly what they did was they created a defensive pocket with the river to their back. And after 10 or 11 days, they were running out of ammunition, and they had to. What they decided to do, the Allies had actually got to the south side of the river by now. They managed to fight their way up there, so they managed to evacuate the remaining soldiers, airborne soldiers, off. So this is the infamous bridge. It's not the original one. The original one was blown up a month after the battle. I'll tell you a bit how it ended towards the end. But this was built in completely the same as a replica in about 1947, 1948. There's a very impressive church tower that you can get the lift up, and you have a fantastic view. You can see all around Holland and Germany. It's really impressive. So that's the bridge that they were on this side, but they never got across because of the Germans. That's it from this side as well. So I sort of, when you go to these places, if you've ever, I can sort of, if you've never been to a battlefield site, whether it's World War II or World War I can recommend it, even if you're not really interested. The cemeteries are incredibly moving. This is the largest cemetery at a place called Oosterbeek. Oosterbeek is just up the road where most of the fighting was. There's about 1,500 mainly British airborne guys there, but there's also other soldiers buried there as well, mainly Allied. And in amongst all this, you know, you go to museums and you read about the battles and the famous people and that, but in amongst all of this, there's always really, really heartwarming stories. And it maybe, you know, from a faith perspective, it made me think about the Good Samaritan a lot, because there were so many stories there about whilst you've got people killing each other, let's just call it as it is, and you've got very tough fighters there, and that's what they're bred to do. There were some incredible acts of kindness in amongst all of them, very, very touching human stories. This one brought a lump to my throat when I read it. My brother was actually he was in tears. So this was two brothers who, I think they were from Cornwall, I think they were Cornish miners. They joined up in 1942, volunteered for the Airborne as an elite unit. They were fighting around Oosterbeek. They happened to be in the same unit, which I think is quite unusual. I think they tried to dissuade that because of repeat of World War I, where you had whole families and whole communities signing up together and, you know, getting killed together. But one of the brothers was shot, went down, badly injured. So his brother was there. He ran to try and rescue him. He was shot, and they were both killed and died together. So that was, that still brings a bit of a lump to my throat. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a member of the Hayes Legion, as is my dad and my brother. I sit on the committee, and that's my nephew there. That's the four of us. And that's the main memorial stone at that cemetery. We were able to present a wreath there, which was great. A gentleman that took the photo, he was a lovely guy. He was about the same age as Dad. And we were chatting to him, and we said, "Oh, what brings you here?" And he said, "Oh, my dad's here." Oh, and I didn't know if he meant his you know, obviously at that age, being the same age as my dad, I knew he wasn't alive, but he could have been a veteran. He said, "No, he's buried here," and I only found him a few years ago, and he took us to the headstone, so that was quite a touching story. So obviously, as most people are aware, the World War II generation are you know, there's not many of them left. I remember Dad and I, we went to my brother, we went to the Normandy 50th in 1994, and there were loads of veterans then, you know, loads of guys back then. They were in their 70s, 80s, and there was hundreds, possibly even a few thousand there. You know, they were everywhere, and they were great. But they're all gone, they're disappearing now, and it's so important that we keep these memories alive. So this gentleman here, there was a bit of a ceremony here, and they have a thing where they have the flower children. So that the Dutch in this area, I've been to Belgium, I've been to France, and the communities there were very supportive of what happened and how they were liberated. But the Dutch take it to another level. They completely are indebted to these guys, and they get treated like royalty. So that was the only veteran that we did actually see on the day, but he was completely overwhelmed. And the Flower children, ever since the war, local school children adopt a grave to look after it, and that they've passed that down through the generations. That's just Hartstein Hotel, so that was the main base, which is quite an interesting place to go. That was that same memorial at the end of the weekend. So we went there, laid our wreath, and by the Sunday, that's what it looked like. So you can see there's a lot of people commemorating. This was another heartwarming story. This is the St Elizabeth Hospital, sorry. It's not a hospital now, I think it's just flats. So this was I think it was a Protestant-funded hospital, had been for many years before the war, and its staff were all mixed German and Dutch, and had been for many years. So obviously in 1940, when Holland fell to the Germans, you can imagine that things were a bit difficult working here, but all the nurses, both Dutch and German, kept working together through the war. This is on the edge of Arnhem. This changed hands 4 times between the Germans and the Brits, with constant fighting, and the British and the German and the medical staff and the Dutch medical staff were all working together to deal with and treating all the injured. Didn't matter what they were, whether they were German or British, they all got treated the same way. So that was another sort of heartwarming story. They also, I mentioned the SS division. I don't want to talk too much about them as individuals, but their commanding officer agreed to a ceasefire in the middle of Arnhem because there were so many wounded, the Brits couldn't cope with it. He agreed to a ceasefire to get all the Brits out, which I thought, again, he didn't have to do that. And that wasn't really in keeping with the character of those people, but I thought that was another heartwarming fact. That might be it. Yes, it is. So just how it ended, I said 12,000 went in. After 10 days, they managed to evacuate the remaining out, and there were 2,000 left of those British. So there were 10,000 killed and captured, and many died and stayed there to this day. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully I didn't talk too long.